I like seeing craziness
this way.
And the chats.
Oh, the chat, yeah. I try to avoid those.
Yeah. Niles, do we
Okay.
have any masks that have
Yeah.
the ear, not the over the head, but
You mean like this, a
yeah,
KN95?
not,
The
I mean, I've got, I've got one like that. But
Okay, yeah, hang on.
one with just the ear loops.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank
Am
you.
I the only one unmasked here?
Yeah. Blackman and Arthur.
Okay, got it. I don't like it. What's that?
You can take it off to speak.
Okay. I don't think anyone
And I
likes it.
see our good friend Ron is on. Ron, I didn't want to make you feel that you were the lone wolf, so I decided to join you. So to be honest, I had something right before this I needed, so.
Yeah.
Why?
All right. Well, where's your green?
I have it
Only-
on my wristband and my
only
water
Katie.
bottle. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Wristband.
And apparently my magic marker too.
Okay.
Okay, we good?
Yeah.
7:32. All right, calling the meeting to order at 7:32 on March 17th, 2022. Let's start with the weather,
Okay,
Mr. Allen.
I'll get up here and get on camera.
Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody.
Hello.
And I know that everybody enjoyed the weather the last, not with the exception of today. It's St. Patty's Day, didn't turn out too good, but we got more of the same like we had earlier in the week. I don't see any changes at all going into April. Temperatures above normal. We may not see any more days where temperatures during the daytime would be anything below 50 degrees. Nights are going to be mild and the weather is going to be beautiful.
Okay.
And that should be the course and stay the course right through the spring. So weather-wise, good news.
Okay.
Thank you.
Always welcome with that kind of report.
When do we plant?
I would say you could probably start planting by the 15th of April,
Okay. Good.
probably a month earlier.
So
There you
no
go.
April
Okay.
Fool's snowstorm or anything.
No, I don't think so now, Jeff. I've officially pronounced winter dead.
Okay. All right. We'll hold you to it.
Old man winter is
Go on.
done.
Okay. On to Doug for the building administrator's report, please.
I asked him to unmute, so it might.
Okay.
There we go.
Good evening. At 3506 Bradley Lane, they applied for a demolition and building permit. The village building permit was issued on December 9th. The old house has been removed, new house is under construction. They have applied, submitted a wall check that indicates that the walls comply with the approved site plan and the village code, so everything looks good so far. They have a couple things that we have to check later, such as the porch, but that will be added as a finished construction. At 120 Quincy Street, the homeowners are making some additions to the side and rear of the house. The village building permit was issued on February 6th. Exterior work has begun. And then we've got 5 projects that are potentially new projects coming in. That would be at 7200 Delfield Street, at 162 Quincy, at 3500 Raymond Street, at 3511 Raymond Street, and at 3504 Shepherd. We've looked at some concept plans. They haven't submitted anything to the county or the village yet. So they should be coming in probably in a month or so. And that concludes my report.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Okay. Now an opportunity to hear from residents. If you want to raise your hand virtually or indicate if you're on screen. So we'll start with Marty.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. And thanks for the nice weather that's coming up, Keith. I just want to start by thanking Andrew especially for chairing the February council meeting from someplace in Europe. I understand it was 1:30 in the morning, your time, Andrew, at this meeting last month. And I just want to say I think that's a service to the community above and beyond the call of duty. And thank you so much for doing that. That was a very productive meeting. I have a couple comments, Arthur. I looked over the budget documents, and thank you for producing them. They look nice and clear. Should I save that for later in the
Yeah,
evening, and we'll
please
talk
do,
about it
yeah.
when we get to the budget on the agenda?
Yeah, why don't we do that, Marty? I think that makes most sense.
Okay, I'll hold off on that then. And again, thank you all for a really good meeting last month, and I look forward to a good meeting tonight.
Great. Thank you for your kind comments. I did get an email from Anita. I don't see your hand raised. Did you want to keep that for the budget conversation as well?
I'm gonna ask you to unmute, Anita. Sorry.
Thank you, Andrew. If you don't mind, I'd like to just interject them here because I think these meetings go on way past my bedtime.
Okay.
So with your permission, I would just comment on the Chevy Chase at Home that Arthur has in the budget. Having lived through the first discussion in 1999, I think Arthur and a few people may remember the Chevy Chase Elementary School. We went through that and decided, I think, as a village, I remember the vote was unanimous. Arthur was on the committee. Katie's mother was on the committee. And Mike Zielinski, who was a very good lawyer and former judge, was also on the committee. And we decided that once you open that door, it's really impossible to close the door. And I think that was maybe one of Mike's comments at the time. I am really sympathetic to people who can't afford to avail themselves of the services of Chevy Chase. And if there are actually 10 people in the community, I am happy to help raise funding for those memberships. But I think as a village, for us to try and do that, I mean, it will never stop. And again, I speak from experience of having remembered several of these instances in the past. And so I think as a village, we can come together and help people, but I don't think as a council and a government facility, we can really do that. So thank you for letting me interject that so early in your program.
Shall I wait till later to
Okay.
comment? Or do it?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, Anita, you can stick around so that there will be a rebuttal from Arthur and a discussion amongst the council members and other residents. But we appreciate your feedback, and I think we've had this come up previously and had a discussion about it. So we'll have another one today. So
Well,
thank you.
If you're making a distinction between a contribution and a grant, I think that's a pretty nebulous kind of distinction, although I'm certainly not a lawyer. But if we're giving away council money, people who need medical help might come to us for a grant. People who need, children's assistance can come for a grant. And so once you open that door,
Yep.
but thank you again. I'll stop.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Anita. I appreciate it. Okay. We'll move on to, unless there are any other hands. Nope. We'll move on to the committee updates, and we'll start with the election committee and George, if he's.
Yep, I'm asking him to unmute right now. Hang on. There we go. There we go.
Thanks, Andrew. So the election committee had a very good, very productive meeting on Monday. We talked through a lot of covered a lot of subjects, including a lot of our ongoing and upcoming communications that I'm sure everyone in the village is going to see a lot more messaging from us as we get deeper into election season, along with talking through a proposal that is in front of the council tonight that is a codification of a lot of the processes that have been ongoing in the past relating to the voter roll that just sets out a kind of clear step-by-step, here's the process we're going to be following from how it is being updated all the way down through when the final version of the voter roll is certified, so that way we've got it ready for counting night and any subsequent challenges where the voter roll might come up. So that's the proposal that the council has in its packet and the materials that were sent over to it. That includes both the processes and then the certification form, for lack of a better word, that is the form that would be signed and witnessed when we finalize the voter roll and attached to the voter roll for any election records keeping. I think Niles can correct me if I'm wrong. I think in the proposal packet, there's two things that might be highlighted in red.
Yes.
So those are just deadlines related to the challenge process that is put in that were something that we briefly discussed, but generally kind of came to agreement on for the challenge process, where it was basically two ways to challenge decisions made. One is I was taken off the voter roll, but I shouldn't have been, and the deadline for that is the same as the deadline for people requesting changes or to be added to the voter roll, because presumably if you were making that challenge, you would have at your disposal any evidence that you would need. But the other one, and why it's highlighted in red, is setting a challenge for challenging someone's status on the voter roll and saying, I don't think that person should have been getting a ballot. And so the deadline for that, we had discussed and set, I think it's May 2nd, so 8 days before the election, thus giving us enough time to investigate and run through the process that we laid out. Because from, and Ron can correct me if I'm overstating anything, from our conversation, the voter roll process deals with our ability to declare voters to be not qualified rather than striking them for the voter roll. The county has a very lengthy process for striking people from the voter roll. What the committee has is, and voted forward, is basically a scaled down version of that by which we can declare a voter not qualified and not mail them a ballot. It is, if an issue exists, if issues have been identified during the process about inconsistent records or a question about whether or not someone lives there, the committee makes a phone call, sends an email, sends a physical letter to their last known address, and depending on the results of what we hear from that, using that to make a determination as the committee vote as to whether or not we are going to mail that individual ballot. So I think that's all the materials in front of you. I would also add, just for anyone who is listening in or in attendance, the nominations period closes at 6 p.m. tomorrow. So that's the nomination period. The candidate statement and the COI forms are due the following Friday. But don't forget, if you are nominating someone else, you need to have a email, a letter, or some acknowledgement from that person saying they accept the nomination. That needs to come in prior to the 6 p.m. deadline tomorrow. Or you can choose to nominate yourself, in which case you obviously don't need a separate acceptance. But so that can be emailed to the committee inbox. I don't think at this point mail would probably get to the village office prior to the deadline tomorrow, but it can also be physically dropped off at the village office prior to 6 p.m. tomorrow. So the nominations deadline closes tomorrow. So yeah, if you are interested in wanting to put your name in, just keep that deadline in mind.
Okay.
We
Thank
don't
you.
have to vote or anything on this, do we? This is just for information purposes?
Yeah, I mean, Ron, maybe you can just remind us, is this something that needs to be voted on, or is this just by passing, by passing through the election committee or passed by the election committee, it's a done deal?
This is something that the council should approve, because the charter provides that the elections committee operates pursuant to rules approved by the council.
Okay. All right.
So I move that we adopt the procedures on the voter rolls presented to us by the election committee.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay, unanimous. Thank you so much, George, for your hard work and the work of the election committee. Really appreciate it. And I think we have several folks on here. I don't have my computer, but I see Naomi's on.
Yeah, Naomi is.
Naomi. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Next, Lori, do you want to give us an update from ethics? Wherever you want to speak from.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay to take my mask off?
Yeah, take your, yeah, please.
No, I'm good. On March 10th, the Ethics Committee met for the fourth time this term to discuss our upcoming year-end report format and to continue to work on the development of ethics training for village, public officials, and employees. Following up on our unanimous December vote to issue a year-end ethics committee report, we identified several ethics-related metrics to document our committee's actions over the past year. The issuance of a year-end synopsis is part of our committee's ongoing public communication initiative to reinforce public confidence that village officials and employees are executing their official duties with impartiality and an absence of conflict of interest. Concerning ethics training, our committee reviewed council member comments we received prior to the meeting and analyzed our training draft. In considering various methodologies for framing ethical dilemmas, we agreed that presenting scenarios from a neutral perspective without initially suggesting solutions would encourage the highest level of volunteer participation. We unanimously voted to approve the revised version of the training program, which is currently available for review in our March meeting packet on the ethics page of the village website. Niles will also be setting up a direct link to the training on our committee page, which hopefully will make the document more easily locatable for interested residents. Following the finalization of our training plan, our committee offered to administer ethics training for the first time ever to the election committee. In response to a request from an election committee member to conduct ethics training in an open session, the ethics committee considered the request and unanimously voted that training be held in an administrative session as initially planned. Our decision was based on the fact that this approach is consistent with best practices, as training is really most effective when conducted in small groups. We held our first live ethics training last Monday night and will be evaluating the session at our next meeting. All comments and suggestions from the election committee participants and council member auditors are welcome. Additional information about the ethics committee and a copy of the minutes from our meetings can be found on the ethics page of the village website. Residents are also encouraged to attend the next committee meeting scheduled for April 26th at 7 p.m. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, and so we'll do the staggered terms discussion after we get
Sounds good.
Keith's update.
Concerning the Community Engagement Committee, we discussed this in January, and what I'd like is that the council members have an opportunity, if they haven't already, to look over a plan that we have for activities group plan in Martin's Additions, where we would, which would bring the community closer together, and it would engage and build relationships. And what we would actually do would be to have individual block captains go to everybody's home in the village and distribute this plan, and have people that would like to get engaged to contact me. And but I want everybody on the committee to be on board with this. I would prefer that than to just go ahead and do it anyway. It's not going to cost the village anything monetarily, and there wouldn't be any work be done on the part of Niles. So hopefully we can, move forward on that. Our next committee meeting will be next month in April, and I'll give Niles a date on that. And I thank you very much.
But Keith, is there a plan, a document, something that describes this?
There was a letter. It was just
Oh.
a letter that
Okay.
we haven't had a chance as a council to
Okay.
really provide feedback, since there was
Okay, was
somewhat
that-
of a bandwidth issue with the election plan.
Okay,
and
that's
all.
fine. Okay.
So I promised Keith in a separate conversation we had when we ran into each other that we'll look at this in earnest and provide feedback and suggestions.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith.
I just want to add one comment. I know this may not be the time, it may be when you have a chat with Keith. I know that in the chat room from the last meeting and some other comments that were made, there was a discussion whether or not this fit within the scope of the current mission. And so I just put that out there that, again, I wouldn't potentially want that to be the reason why the idea isn't perhaps even looked at. So one thing just put on the table for discussion, if that's the case, then perhaps the committee or council and committee could discuss, does it make sense? Do they, first of all, do they have to amend their scope for the letter to be considered? Again, I don't want this to be a bureaucratic thing, because I know Keith is very passionate, the other folks are very passionate. This is done by a majority of their committee, and folks are behind it. I know we have some technical things about the letter we want to probably discuss, but just in general, we wouldn't want a bureaucratic issue to get in the way of even looking at the letter. So I just wanted to put that out there. And again, that may be part of your
Well,
discussion.
yeah, and there,
Yeah,
it
we'll
may,
look at it.
it may, Jeff said it may involve discussion of the mission statement for the committee.
Yeah, no,
But-
we'll definitely, we'll take a look, for
Yeah.
sure.
I just want to say that, personally, I would be, great with, a number of things. I think there are some feedback that we can talk about, so it's not overlapping. But again, kudos to everyone who's behind it.
Thank you.
And thanks for your patience, Keith, appreciate it. Back to Lori, on the discussion of staggered terms for the Ethics Committee.
Is it back to me? Am I leaving you to say?
Well, it's,
Well,
it has your, I put
Well,
put in the packet your Venn diagram.
Your
Yeah.
Venn diagram.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to say
and
something
I
about it.
think in a past council meeting, you mentioned that this has been a discussion.
This is, yes, I did discuss it at the last council meeting. This is a recommendation, from the committee. We voted unanimously to recommend that the council consider, amending the code. It is, Arthur had raised whether it was the charter. It is not the charter. It's the code that would need to be amended. It would be consistent with the other local jurisdictions, as I say here, which they all have, 3-person committees and 3-year terms. I don't know that we would need to take that big of a leap. I would, if it was me, I would suggest a 2-year term, and that was the general feeling among our committee members. Every member of our committee felt that with the work that the Ethics Committee does to not be too big of an ask for someone, unlike, maybe the election committee by the time the election's over, they're probably ready to think about doing something else. The election committee has pretty much of a slow drip. The other thing I think is really important to read is that when you look at the Ethics Committee compared to other village committees, all of our responsibilities, or a lot of the responsibilities, the code says that officials shall file with the committee upon entering their positions and prior to any duties related to their positions, and thereafter prior to the first day of each year. The charter mandates that the election committee be appointed in July at the beginning of the council term. So that would mean that the ethics committee is collecting the oath of office, is collecting the conflict of interest statements, probably for most everyone by August 1st. And we are formalizing the process this year to just establish a more formal review. If we're gonna have everyone complete these forms, someone should at least be looking at them and keeping other jurisdictions, just keep a chart. And that will be one of the metrics that we include in our year-end report. Also, as we move towards being more training, I like to say we're more training than enforcement oriented now. Training should occur most likely at the beginning of people's terms. Now, there may be opportunities such as this year where there were 2 new election committee members appointed, and we had a brand new training program. So it just seemed like the perfect time to roll out our new training program. But we had initially talked about doing it as part of the orientation program. And we worked pretty hard on coming up with how to present the scenarios in a really neutral fashion. And I'm not sure it'd be something that someone who's newly appointed to the committee could just do after, taking their appointment onto the ethics committee. The downsides, some people like the status quo, don't like change. I would think mathematically we would have to settle on a set number for the committee, either 3 or 5, because once you start talking about staggered terms, if you had a 5-person committee, it would be difficult to transition to a 3-person committee with terms being up every 2 years. Let's see. We've heard comments on both sides of it limits the ability of the council to appoint their own ethics committee. One resident thought that that was a privilege of the council to have their own ethics committee. Our council chair said that we're all one village, so it really shouldn't matter who appoints the ethics committee. In terms of independence, it's probably a good policy that each council doesn't appoint their own ethics committee, that there is carryover. And I don't know, what questions might anyone have?
Just one quick one about the numerical, setting the number of members,
Okay,
that it needs to be 3 or 5.
right.
It could work with 4.
Oh, it could,
Couldn't-
okay, it could definitely work with 4, but I would say that having an uneven number would be the best
Yeah,
practice.
yeah,
Just in
it
terms
generally
of-
is
of voting
with
and,
committees anyway,
you
yeah.
know, 'cause it would be, I would think it's pretty easy to divide. Although we've had, I think, all but 1 votes this year have been unanimous votes. But I think the best practice would be to have an uneven number on a committee. And that is with the, although I think, no, you told me Montgomery County has 4, right?
Montgomery County, no. Yeah, Montgomery County, I think I'm trying to remember this now. I think they have 4
They do.
permanent members, and then they have it's something like that where it's a hybrid. Do you remember, Ron? I'm trying to remember right off the top of my head.
No, but I can see if I can find that.
Yeah, can you find that? Because from what I remember is that it's like 4 are appointed by the executive, I think, and then the rest are appointed by some other entity is what I remember, where it's a hybrid thing, so that it's not all coming from the same place. But Ron's looking, so we'll look for that.
And setting it up, you could
Yeah.
follow the same model that went back to the charter, or, they did, initially in the charter, I think they did 3 years and 2 years. You could do 2 years and 1 year for the first year, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I don't think we're not in an environment where council members need to appoint their own ethics committee. I mean, we're appointing our friends and neighbors to serve, not our team that will just represent us, especially on the subject of ethics. I think it's highly inappropriate. So I would support the staggered terms.
Anyone have any other negative? I want to hear some more negatives.
Yeah. So go ahead, Ron, first.
Okay.
Yeah, the county commission has 5 members. Each member is appointed by the executive and confirmed by the council. They serve a term of 4 years,
That's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
and they're staggered with no more than 2 members expiring in any 1 year.
Okay. Okay, good. So nobody has any good solid arguments why we shouldn't do this?
I mean,
It's the 2-year term, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Finding people to commit to 2 years. As Lori said,
Right.
they don't have a really heavy lift, so it shouldn't be that daunting.
Okay.
And the other thing is it would require a code revision,
Yeah.
which also shouldn't run into a lot of any.
Well, 'cause I didn't have
think,
any
so-
objections. I was
yeah.
hoping that maybe somebody else could enlighten me about something I'm missing.
Yeah.
But no, okay, so there isn't anything.
Well, and it's transitioning from.
And there's a
Yeah.
transition.
The only
then
other
with the
question I
stagger
would have is
start.
how you determine
How does
who
the
gets
stagger
1
start?
year, who gets,
Yeah.
like, how are you beginning this process?
Right.
Well,
No,
I
that
think
would-
when they did the charter, they volunteered.
Okay.
So you might, that might be one
I-
approach
okay.
that you
Yeah.
could take.
And
I
then-
think what
Or
you
you could
could
have a
say,
moderate if you
yeah.
didn't have a volunteer.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
or you could say in the announcement, I'm throwing this out. 2 members are appointed for 2 years. 1 member is appointed for 1 year, or 3 and 2, right?
Right.
And so then, when we fill out that little form, one of the things that you can put as a question
Yes,
is a
who
drop down. It says
who
2
gets
years or
what?
1 year,
Right.
Right,
and then you know who's
right.
committed themselves to 2 years that way, and then you can
Or
just appoint
everyone
them.
could commit themselves to 2 years and we make a selection.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Mhm.
and there has been one member of our committee who said in a meeting that, he would consider doing a second term, so maybe you take, an existing committee member.
Right, yeah,
And
yeah.
have them do an additional year.
Clock there.
And then the only other question I would have for changing the code is, do we have to change anything related to the number of members we would want on the committee, or is that just a continuation of at least 3, but we ideally want to have 5? I mean, is that something that needs to?
Okay, well, that is not actually in the code with the preferential 5. It's at
That's a
least-
chart.
No, that's only in the that's from the language from the election plan.
Okay.
The code for both the election committee and the ethics committee is at least 3.
Okay.
But there's no preferentially 5.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
All right.
we can have Ron draft, code amendments.
Yeah. So is that the next step then?
So we vote on
Yes,
having,
so you would
on
vote
directing
to
Ron.
direct
Okay.
Ron to
All right.
draft.
So someone want to?
I'll move to direct Ron to do the appropriate changes to our code.
Okay.
And I will second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay.
I'll add in please, if that's okay.
You had a what?
I'll add in the please.
Okay.
To please.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you, Lori, and the ethics committee.
So I don't know if you-
Super helpful.
I'm just gonna, one just side comment, Lori and Ethics Committee, just, I think it's worth showing the Venn diagram. I think you've upped the game for all of us, and I'm just wondering, the next presentation we have, we may have to, all
Step it up.
think about.
Maybe in
step
color
up.
the next time.
Yeah.
The Venn diagram
Maybe it wasn't color, and
available
Niles
on
just
the-
had
Yes,
it in
it is.
black and white.
Yes, it is.
There wasn't a color?
This is kind of serious, so I wanted to.
A little
give
disappointed.
Walkability.
Yeah.
It's very colorful.
We do have a comment here, Marty. If you wanna, I just saw your hand.
Yep, I'm gonna ask it up. No, I'll do it.
Yeah, thanks. Quick comment. I just want to strongly recommend that the council have 5 people on the ethics committee, because under the Open Meetings Act, it's really just difficult logistically for a 3-person committee to function. No
Yeah.
2 members of the committee can even talk to each other, to even ask an informational question about anything regulatory at all, because any 2 members of a 3-member committee constitute a quorum.
Yep.
So having 5 members on a committee really is important, just functionally, for the committee to be able to do projects and, proceed to actually be efficient. So
Yep.
please, 5 people. Thank you.
That's a good point, and I think this council has pushed for that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
would just say that, having served on the ethics committee with 3 people and 5 people, I disagree with that. I think that 3 is the better number, because you don't, I think in terms of transparency, you don't really want to be having these private conversations, especially for an ethics committee. We want to do everything in the light of day, and, both years have been a great experience, but I would really push for 3 people on the committee.
Okay.
That's just my opinion,
Good.
not on behalf of the committee, but just my experience of being on the committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good point, with ethics in particular.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much. All right, moving on to financial matters.
Okay. Let me just take this off for a moment. Okay, financial, let me just go through this and then we'll spend time on the new ventures. First, revenues. This coming year, we expect revenues not perhaps to be at a record high, but high in comparison, say, with the last 6-7 years. The reason for that is that 2 of our inputs are going up. The county's revenue sharing. No, wait a minute. Where am I?
Yep, no, yeah,
Yeah.
it is the county's.
County's revenue sharing funds. This is intended to make up for functions that the municipality does that the county would have done, like garbage pickup. And then the state's highway user fees, which does the same thing. Since we operate our roads, they don't. We get a fee from that, and both of those are going up. But the largest source of income is coming from the income tax. So far this year, in the first 9 months or 8 months, we will have already received more money from this source than we ever have for an entire year. And we still have 4 months to go with at least one large payment. Now, we cannot count on that continuing next year. And I expect, based on income tax receipts from the state and the overall state of the economy, that we will be going back to a normal high level. And so this is written into our budget projection for next year. Okay, so that being said, we can then turn to the expenditures. The one big continuing item are salaries of staff, police, and so on, which will be going up roughly 10%. We have not promised any raises. So this was clear.
Yes.
But knowing which way inflation is going and standard practices, we expect that salaries of office staff and police will be going up. Now, there are two new ventures, and this is what I want to talk about most today. In both the Walkability Survey, the Safety and Health Survey, we have had numerous requests for doing snow shoveling on private sidewalks. And since we do have the budget for this, and we used to do it in the past, I am putting back in shoveling for private sidewalks for people who request it. Not everybody. There are certain people like myself who can't wait for a good snow to get out to shovel. Please don't shovel my sidewalk. You will be doing me a disservice. But for anyone else who requests it, put your name in. When the crews come around, they'll go by and shovel it. Now, it turns out that that's expensive. It's hard to figure out how much that's going to cost. It all depends on how many people request it. At the time, the last time we did this, when we shoveled everybody's sidewalk, the manual shoveling of sidewalk was twice as much as it was for the streets. Now, we don't think everybody's going to request that. We made a guess it will be perhaps half this level of the streets. So that's number one. The second venture that I am suggesting, again coming out of some of our surveys, is support for aging in place. Village does not have the capacity to have that, to do that. The county doesn't. What the county does is relies on the so-called villages, Silver Spring Village, Chevy Chase at Home. There are 30 of those in Montgomery County. There are nonprofit groups that support older and now less older people. Chevy Chase at Home is opening up to all ages. But they do provide social services as well as support of picking up medicines at a drugstore, taking people to a doctor's appointment, these sorts of things. Now, what I am suggesting is not a charitable contribution, but something like a contract with Chevy Chase at Home to deal with a certain number of residents from Martin's Addition. They have a program right now they call a scholarship fund. They have a fund, money given to them, where they check on the need of the applicant and then give money to the person for membership. I talked to the director there. She suggested that would be very easy to do. I don't want to do means testing here. I don't want people to come with their tax forms or with like an educational needs statement to fit in. But we just don't want anybody walking in and say, yeah, I like that freebie, I want to handle that. But Chevy Chase at Home already has a program where they, with discussions with the families, they do look at that. So I put this on the same level as shoveling. We are not asking people requesting home shoveling, show us your disability statement. Are you sure you really can't shovel? Let's you walk up and down the street a couple of times. We're not asking for income statements from them. There simply will be a request and we'll do it. I'm suggesting we go a little bit further here, let Chevy Chase at Home do the vetting that they do, and then with the money we will provide to them, provide funds to a village resident. Now, I'm only suggesting $6,000 that would include 10 full family memberships. We may not get that. It would be on a first come, first served basis. According to the executive director there, we may not get that because people are unaware of the services. They don't think that it would apply to them. I've talked to a number of people who said, please do it. I know that I want it, but I don't. There are 2 or 3 people that I've talked to. I think it would require a lot of dissemination, publicity to let people know that it's available. So it's not a charitable contribution, so we would have to come up with the form. And Ron, this is where you earn your pay. A good lawyer will tell us how to do it. There are various ways to do it. Grants to residents, a contract with the organization, not a charitable contribution. It's about as much a charitable contribution as shoveling your sidewalk. So what I want to hear from council members and from residents are your reactions to this. Is this a good idea, a terrible idea, worst thing you ever heard, best thing you ever heard? how might we refine this and how might we go forward? So that's my presentation for the night.
So-
One other thing. That's on the read the statement. A number of residents have requested that we take our surplus and hand it back to the residents. And they say, Section 5 does it, why can't we do it? Well, Section 5 rebates part of the property tax. We have deliberately reduced our property tax to an average of about $50 a household. So if we were rebate the entire property tax, that would be $50. The other thing we could just do, reduce it to zero. Rebating or remitting money that comes either from the county or from the state really runs into legal challenges, because the state and county could say, that's not your money. We gave you money for certain village purposes, not to give that out to your residents. And that could raise serious legal challenges. So having looked into it, as far as I'm concerned, I'm taking that off the table as something to be considered. Again, unless somebody really has a good legal or other kind of argument about how or why we should do it differently. Okay, it's open. The floor is open.
Okay.
Council members.
I have comments, but Susan,
Go.
do
Okay,
you
well,
want to?
just with regard
Yeah.
to reducing our taxes down to zero,
Yeah.
we've discussed that we really
Right.
don't wanna do that, cause it's legally, it requires extra steps. It's not the worst idea I've ever heard.
Okay.
It's a really good idea, I think, in principle, but I do think that it's, trying to recast what is inevitably.
But I would ask, how do you distinguish snow shoveling from another kind of service, a social service?
But it's
It's not a
supporting
nonprofit.
work
Contractor
for
providing
the
services.
village, basically.
We contract with shoveling. We don't go, Niles isn't going out shoveling snow. We contract with an organization to do it. Not a shoveling service.
Yeah.
So I don't see a logical distinction here.
Okay. So my
Think
thoughts-
about it.
Yeah.
You may come up with better arguments than I, but
Initial reaction is this is a great organization. It's a worthy cause. But in some ways, I think it's a little bit apples and oranges, and I would have to associate myself with Anita's, for example, that there's so many of these. We've had this conversation, so many great organizations that could be incredibly helpful to our residents, but we would start picking winners and losers. And I think it just opens a can of worms on this. And so
they'll think when you say that, is that different? How is that different from shoveling?
because shoveling is like, how's it different from trash pickup? How's it
Right, yeah,
different from,
exactly.
okay.
How is it different?
But it's not a nonprofit that we're picking. We're
And it's a
services that the
service provided
residents need.
Available to all residents with regard to snow shoveling and trash pickup and other
Yeah,
services
well.
that we contract. to
But you're
have
not.
provided.
You're having contracts with the trash service, for example. But are we going to open up an RFP for all the nonprofits in our area to compete for $6,000?
No, we wouldn't do it for
But I'm saying
$6,000.
that's
If
what
it were
make it-
$100,000,
But
yes, we would.
That's what
We
would make it equivalent
Yeah,
and
right.
fair.
If it were
right?
$100,000, we would do that. If there were several, organizations in the community who could do it, yeah, we would. Jeff.
So, first of all, Arthur, I want to thank everyone for their comments, whether it's pro or con. And Anita, I also very much want to thank you for your comments. I just wanted to add a couple additional thoughts. And Arthur, it always feels good to be on your side, because it's always a little bit hard to try and, when you have an opinion, you usually come in with really
Come in
sensitive
hot.
great
He
points.
comes
So
in hot.
now that I feel on Arthur's side, I feel really good about this. So
Let's hear. I want
a
to hear
couple
it.
thoughts. So let's just look at the finances. Again, you have always been the careful steward of VMA finances. I think we all agree. So, the idea that you're behind it makes me feel good. The other piece, if we just do the quick back of the envelope calculation, the $6,000 is 0.24% of our overall reserve. And if you want to throw in the snow shoveling, we're talking 0.84%. So we're not talking financially this is an issue.
Right.
I also really, the idea, it's grounded in data. As you know, I'm in epidemiology, so the idea, we're on the public safety committee. So a large preponderance of residents snow shoveling and aging in place. So we're talking about finding a way to provide a service to a significant majority of what residents have asked for.
And I just checked the census data today. 32% of Martin's Addition is over 65. And if you want more numbers, about half of those people have incomes. This is the land of the privileged. Half of those people have incomes under $100,000, and substantially under $75,000.
So the other quick things, I promise I'll make it short, is, look, many of you know I work in the biggest bureaucracy on the planet. That's not BMA, it's federal government with state. And I always say to folks, if I were to look at all the reasons why not to do something because of bureaucracy, I would never get out of bed in the morning. So I'm just saying, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, this is something that's grounded in data, it's grounded in that a majority of our residents want to do it. Let's find a way. Now, with the other concerns which you expressed, which I think are really important, I feel that these are one-off decisions, that it still takes a majority of the council to decide. So I feel comfortable that we're not opening up a massive floodgate in addition to the fact this is very small. The only thing that I look at Niles about, and again, you're talking about someone who serves as a grant officer representative for the federal government, is it does take an awful lot, whether it's a small amount or a larger amount, getting to Andrew's point, of doing a grant or a contract. Now, this is where we could always work with Ron. Like, for example, do we have to compete it? Could it be a sole? Whatever it is. But I would say I would want to turn to Niles of just how difficult and how much it would do to set this up. But with that said, I would like to find a way, as long as Niles and our staff feel, you know what, it's a little bit extra work, but we can make it happen.
So I mean, that goes to questions that go beyond just the question of funding. One is, depends on what we're doing. Because like $6,000 itself is below the threshold that needs to be competed and needs to be technically approved by the council. The treasurer and the chair can just approve that amount of funds. Two is, if we are doing it just as people get a grant to do the membership or whatever, I think it would just be filling out an application and making sure that, as Ron had mentioned when I asked him just to understand, to do a social service like this, there needs to be some means testing, or that might not be the right word, Ron, but there needs to be some evaluation of need, rather than just giving money to people. So we'd have to create some criteria around it. That would take a little bit of time. Versus...
Yeah, at least to demonstrate that...
Yes.
Well, let me add, Ron, on this point, Ron, think about how this differs from snow shoveling. Why do we not ask people for a disability affirmation or income affirmation for snow shoveling? Think about it. You don't have to give me the answer now, but unless you have one.
I think he does.
I do.
Okay.
So I think they are closely related, but the one major difference is the village has the duty to maintain the rights of way in a safe condition, including the sidewalks. Many municipal governments pass on the duty to maintain the sidewalks to the abutting residents, but if they fail to do so, then the village needs to take action. But there is a direct responsibility of the village to maintain sidewalks.
Good point.
With respect to social services, there's no duty that the village provide these. However, Maryland law does provide that municipalities may provide social services. So it would be a permissible program that the village could enter into. But my point to Niles was, public money has to be spent for legitimate public purposes. And so we would, I think, need to demonstrate that the amount of public funds being spent is worthwhile, that we are actually effectuating social services, and that there's a demonstrable need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to get in there.
Right.
Arthur, I like your plan. I like your proposal. And I'd go as far as to say I think it's time to reconsider the code on charitable donations. I mean, that was, 10 years ago, and we have an ample budget, and the argument that there are too many charitable organizations, where would you begin? well, it just takes some
Right.
thinking and criteria. Yeah.
Well, when
but I did
was
have a question
okay, go
about
ahead.
the supporting 10 families. Why?
Why
Not 10, just that was just-
because I have 10 fingers and
Okay.
him is 10.
I just was. I just was. That was my one
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
What was I going to say? We could rely on, if this were a contract with Chevy Chase at Home, and they could do the vetting for us under their existing scholarship program. So they already have this set up to do exactly this sort of thing. And so the selection process would not be, anybody who comes in, the property magnate who lives around the corner wouldn't qualify, but others would. And that would also remove any burden from the village office.
Right.
I see Lori has her hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question. This isn't for or against the proposition, but how would you prevent it from becoming an entitlement? I could see if you're vetting people the first year and choosing 10, I would assume that those 10 people would still need it the following year and the year after and the year after that. So, would it be ever expanding as people start aging, or?
Yeah, well,
what's your plan for
that's a
that?
good question. I would say it depends on the experience that we have with it. People would, I think every year you'd have to reapply. When we could expand it.
Cool, though, if you got it one year and then you needed it and then next year you're kicked off of it?
Not necessarily. You might or may not. It may, I guess, would depend on your situation. Would be up to the vetting organization. But you're right. It could. Not necessarily anything wrong with that. But let me go back to Katie's point about revisiting the charitable contribution.
And when we go there, before everybody points out that my mother was one of the council members to vote this, I love my mother, but I am my mother's
and I
daughter.
was
We didn't
too.
agree on everything.
Well,
So.
I voted for it too.
Yeah.
And the reason at the time was that we were talking about charities, do-good organizations that we all support in our private lives, but did not have specific programs for Martin's Addition. We knew they do good. We knew that citizens and residents who lived here benefited from it, but we weren't supporting activities directed towards identifiable streets and neighbors and people. And so it was the Red Cross versus the community chest. And you say, I'm not going to make a judgment between them. They're both good organizations. We're not going to support. Nobody know-how was the way I phrased it. This is a very different kind of operation. It would be for specific individuals through specific organization to provide specific kinds of services. And that's why I thought we could, it made sense to me to bring it forward. Okay, I'm
like
open to any other.
So I mean, essentially, the argument is this is not picking winners and losers among NGOs that, let's say, the Sierra Club, that doesn't have a direct impact on an elderly couple living in VMA.
Yes.
But this is an NGO that is helping residents.
Right.
That has the potential.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other? So I see a couple of raised hands.
So I think Anita had her hand up.
Let's do Anita and then Marty.
Yeah. I'm asking you to unmute Anita. There you go.
Arthur, I champion your enthusiasm. It's terrific. And I'm not against supporting Chevy Chase at Home, certainly, which I've done personally for years. But I think your analogy of they help the village, they do. So does the elementary school help the village. And so what's the difference if they come to you from the school, any one of the schools that help the village, including the private schools that help the village? That we need a scholarship program for children who can't afford sports or children who can't afford whatever. This is what you're opening the door to. And this is what I think 10 years ago, 12 years ago, gave everybody pause. And I still think it's worth trying to find another way to do this than doing it out of the coffers of the village. Not that the village doesn't have the money, that's not the issue, or that the cause isn't right, that's not the issue. The issue is once you open the door.
We open lots of doors around here, Anita. We do lots of services. We're planting trees in people's backyards that we never did before. I think that all of these are things to be considered. Just because we have not done it in the past doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it in the future.
So is your proposal that the 10 people that you may help are village residents?
Yeah,
Is
village
that what-
residents who would apply to the Chevy Chase at Home, saying, I'm
Right.
from Martin's Addition, I know you have funds to support me, my income is very low, I cannot afford this, and I need the service. So it would be for identifiable individuals, not just for the village, they would be
Right,
identifiable
yeah.
people.
Yeah, I rest my case, I'm done.
Okay.
And I just want to point out, and again, I really, really, truly appreciate and value your opinion, is the distinction here is this was informed by a task force as well as a survey to the community
Right.
as a priority.
Right.
You know, until we hear that the Chevy Chase Elementary School or something else gets that level of support, you know, it's a nice idea, but it's not the same as this.
Right, right.
Okay, Marty?
Am I up?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, thank you guys, and I want to really thank Arthur very much for the careful thought that went into how to do this, and Niles, I know you worked on it as well. Thank you both. I want to check the numbers, Arthur. You had 32% of VMA residents are over 65. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct.
And about half of those have incomes under 100,000 a year.
I will tell you in a moment, if I had a slip here, wrote it down.
Well, Jeff, I believe in data, and I appreciate you doing the homework on this.
And this is actually the 2020 census. 19% have income under $100,000. That is, and 9 families, these are households, have income 75,000 or less. 7.5%. Yeah.
We have a significant number of people here who are not wealthy. I mean, the perception is always that this is a very wealthy community.
That's right.
In many ways it
That's
is.
right.
But I think that this is a really important data point moment to really recognize that we are a mixed community. And I want to follow up on that idea to support your proposal, because having a third of your residents be over 65 is really valuable. I love Naomi's Nairman's program for having the teenagers interview our long-term residents. That is part of the richness of this environment that benefits all our residents. And that kind of, community diversity, if you will. I mean, the age mix here is really important to me, and I think to a lot of us. We all have basically grandmas and grandpas around the corner from the kids coming up now, and that's a valuable asset for the entire community. That we have
36% are over 65.
We have our age place to have the grandma next door. You can't, when your grandma's in Ohio, we've got grandma right next door. We have elderly residents, and the institutional knowledge, the love of community, the community coherence that comes from having longtime residents is a value to Martin's Additions in and of itself. Keeping our long-term residents is valuable to everybody. And so, Arthur, I strongly support this proposal. I think you've thought through how to do the administrative logistics on it, having charities at home do any necessary means testing. Ron, your point is well taken, that public money has to be spent for legitimate public purposes. I would argue very strongly that keeping our elders in our community as part of the network that knits us together is in fact a very important and legitimate public service, public purpose. And Katie, in terms of charitable contributions, I also think that we could do a little more there too, but I'd be open to that, but that's not my call. What I want to say right now is, Arthur, I think this is really helpful. I would like to see it expand perhaps to more than 10 down the road, but let's see how it works in a couple of trial years. And Niles, I understand from your comments that it is administratively not a burden on staff.
Okay.
It's certainly not a financial burden. And I just want to really strongly encourage the council to proceed on this, because it benefits the entire community. This is a public purpose. Thank you.
So the one thing I wanted to raise. I mean, I'm supportive of the idea of helping our residents, of course. My biggest worry is how this will be advertised so that everyone sees this and knows there's this opportunity, and B, even though we have a percentage here that has been disclosed of folks that make have an income, a fixed income mostly, probably among those folks of under 100 or under 75. There are also folks that are making over 100 that have liabilities, obligations that make it difficult to add another $600 to their annual. It's an $600.
Yeah.
So I don't to.
Have a limit, yeah.
You know,
Fixed limit.
I don't want to discriminate against those that say, you know, I might be making 150, but of those, I'm spending 50 for family members that need help or health care issues or have you. So my biggest worry is that there'll be more than 10 families applying, and there we have decided, sorry, too
Well,
late, and that worries me a little
Well,
bit.
this is, in my discussions with the director there, she said, don't be surprised if you get very little take-up. Because, first of all, not everybody will know about it. Second, people don't recognize that they may need the service. She says,
Yeah.
typically what happens, you have a very active person, and they fall or have some kind of a sudden health crisis, and all the things they used to be able to do, they can't do anymore. And this is when they tend to apply for things. So she says that don't be surprised if you get very little take-up at first. People don't understand, they don't know that they need it, they don't know what's out there. So she said, sometimes it takes education and continuity.
And that's exactly my point. If I were to support this, and if there's support within the community, them not knowing about it is not an option. It's incumbent upon us
To let 'em
to
know.
educate, to advertise, to bring this to every single family's
Right.
attention, to make them understand what the opportunities are.
And if it turns out there's 20 people who need it, we
Yeah.
increase the budget.
Yeah.
And
And
don't-
some discretion, because there's an issue of pride. Some people don't come forward
That's
because
right.
they're ashamed or embarrassed for
Or
the health, which they
and
shouldn't be.
the coordinator in the county, who the safety committee talked to, very knowledgeable and very thoughtful woman, said that most people, he said, you look at your neighbor and you think they need help, and you go and say, do you need some help? And they say, who, me?
Yeah.
I'm fine.
No.
Yeah.
And they're not cognizant of anything that's a problem. And the house is run down, the yard is unmowed and everything, and the weeds are growing up, but they don't see it an issue there.
Logistically speaking, would these funds be transferred to the organization, and they would, if as you pointed out, they said, don't be surprised, it's less than 10 people, we would get the funds reimbursed?
Yeah, we would
or-
have to work out a contractual arrangement that would deal with that.
Okay.
That they would have this to draw on, something of that sort. I'm not a contracts person, so
Yeah.
I don't know how you would do it.
It could depend on how we do it too. We could have a reserve of fund, and then they would just invoice us every time that somebody came through the program. This is just spitballing, so don't hold
Sure,
any of
got
it.
it.
But the idea was that, like, let's say this month they got one person added who fell under the criteria. They send us an invoice for $600.
Okay.
We would send it back, something like that.
This goes to the pride issue and the anonymity that we want to preserve
Right,
for
yeah.
folks that
yeah,
are requesting
exactly,
this.
yeah.
Um,
But I really want to hear back from the community on this,
Yeah.
to hear
If there-
what kind of support there is. I mean, this could be like composting, where some of us think it's the greatest idea, and everyone says,
yeah.
not
What
on my
hap- whatever
property, not on my
happened to
dime.
I'm
Right.
so paying out of
Right.
my own pocket.
Right,
I
yeah.
am too, because there was a core of residents who really thought it was the greatest thing ever,
Yeah.
and a majority of residents said, not with my tax dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So maybe this is more a pulling at the heartstrings of the community if we were to ask them versus
Yeah.
composting, which is
Well, yeah.
a little maybe
which is just the
less
environment of the
emotional, but
future.
yeah, no, right.
This is
It's
taking
only-
care of our people with our money.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
and are
Right.
taking
Right
care
thing
of
to
the
do.
environment with our money, as as Susan points out.
Yeah.
You can't win.
One thing I just want to acknowledge, I thought Lori's comment was incredibly insightful about the possibility of this as an ongoing entitlement. And so I just want to be sensitive. I mean, we know this is a very small percentage, but again, you're talking I'm biased, so whether or not but I grew up with my grandmother, right? So I had to get an early driver's permit so I could support her. So if there was a service like this when I was growing up, it would have been immensely helpful. So I just share that with
Yeah.
everyone for full disclosure. So final point is not to try and add additional barriers, but I mean, is it a pilot, right? Do we look at it, see how
Yeah,
it works for this year,
exactly.
and then we could then reassess it?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. So not a line item for every
Right,
year going
right,
forward, but a
right.
start just
Yeah.
to.
And I would compare this to the private tree program that came out of the tree committee. In the first few years, there was very little take-up. And they had a similar thing in section 5. Every year, at least 15 people were applying for trees. We had like 1 or 2 until it got around, people understood, and now we're getting 9, 10, 15 applications. They're not all good ones, but we're getting them. People are now more familiar with the program. And so we've ended up planting at least 50 trees, good-sized trees in people's backyards or front yards.
So, let's see if we have any other
There's
hands
support
raised.
in the chat.
Yeah. The other question, Ron, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Probably not necessary to add, but I think it would be fair to add based on the arguments that Arthur was making earlier. I mentioned sidewalks. Arthur mentioned trash removal. And that's probably a better argument that Arthur made, because surprisingly, state law does not mandate municipalities to remove trash, but most municipalities do so because it's recognized as a valuable public service.
Yeah. Possibly a health and environmental issue as well.
Yeah.
Are
we near the end?
Well, we have Marty has one more comment to
Yeah.
make on this.
I'm going to ask her to unmute.
Yes, thanks. I mentioned at the beginning that I had a couple other questions about the budget items, and again, I strongly support our snow shoveling as well as the Charities at Home pilot project, which I think will be like the tree project. I think, Arthur, you're calling it exactly right. As people know about it, they'll be more willing to apply for it, provided we do, in fact, protect their privacy, which I think the administrative arrangements can be made to do that. Here are my other questions. On the police salaries, I see that those are projected to go up, and I would like to have the council consider 2 things with regard to the police. I have no objection to paying them more, but I sure want them to do more in terms of enforcing the stop signs. And I want to pick up on something that Niles, I know you have in your answers report later on. It was really helpful in my perception to have that lighted speed monitor sign up on Thornapple for a couple of weeks. I saw a difference. You know, I wasn't out there 24 hours a day, but I saw a difference, and I would really like us to have a speed monitor on Thornapple along with speed humps permanently, and probably several other places in the village too. But the police, there was discussion at the last couple of council meetings about the police sitting there at the corner watching people blow through stop signs and doing nothing because they don't want to ticket them, because the officers we have tend to be more senior and they don't want to go to court, I still think we ought to ticket people who blow our stop signs, including me if I ever ran one. So the question about the police salaries is, can we get lower level officers who would be more willing to write tickets and actually go and spend time in court to get enforcement? And can we get more hours at the stop signs until such time as we have speed humps and those electronic speed monitors in place? In other words, would the council consider really looking at that police role there?
We did.
Because they only had to give us a few hours a week, really. We're not paying for coverage. But the coverage that we get, they're not enforcing stuff. So, issue there about the police. The second issue I had there was on the, what was it here? The snow removal. This is just a question. When you talk about removing snow from sidewalks, big issue for the community. Are you talking about just the sidewalks that are in the right-of-way, or are you talking about the sidewalks in the right-of-way village-wide, plus private shoveling for people, from the right-of-way to their doorstep? Which set of sidewalks are we talking about, or is it both?
Well, there's 2, and one is Brookville.
Right. So there's 2 different things. One is our agreement with Rolling Acres has been to shovel Brookville Road, because that was deemed by the council a few years ago to be more dangerous given, which we'll talk about as well, but given the narrowness of the sidewalk and how close they are to the traffic, right? So that just gets cleared. That's part of Rolling Acres' mandate.
And the plows push
and
up
the plows
snow
push it and all that stuff.
Sidewalk.
The second thing, though, is that what Arthur proposed is about clearing individuals' sidewalks. So the question of this program, and again, both this and the Chevy Chase at Home, this is just about funding. This isn't about what the programs would be. But that's the addition in that I just used that same budget line, so that's why I used it.
5349. It goes from 0 to 15,000.
Right. Yeah, 0 to 15,000 for residential, and that's what Arthur is proposing, which is we have again an application program, whatever we want for people to say, I want you to shovel the sidewalk either in front of my house or however you want to do. So that's sort of the two different distinctions in what we have right now.
And the difference there is it's not there's no cap on these requests. We're just proposing 15,000. We think that's probably where it's going to end up.
It's a guess.
Yes.
It could be more, it could be less, but there's no cap as opposed to the other proposal on Chevy Chase.
That's a good point. My question again, just for clarity, because I'm not quite clear yet. So you got Taylor Street, which has sidewalks on both sides. I really like those sidewalks on both sides. I use them. Would those sidewalks on Taylor Street now be automatically shoveled?
No.
Everybody's houses?
No.
Or would it just be like,
Only
the
if-
sidewalk up to somebody's
Based-
house?
Only
Based
on
on the
request.
request.
On request. Only on request.
So you could have Taylor Street kind of be a patchwork where, Mr. Jones, who's 90, requests that his front walk on Taylor Street and the walk to his house be shoveled. So you have kind of a T-shaped shoveling job there. But then the next door neighbor doesn't shovel their sidewalk along in the right of way, and so then you're back in the snow. And that's a mobility issue, not just for elderly people, but for anybody. I mean, a kid with a stroller, any with a stroller can't get by.
But
We don't really have a requirement that's ever been enforced, I think, in BMA that people are supposed to shovel the walk in front of their house if there is a sidewalk, but it's not always done.
But
And I think it would be really useful again for the council to look at this in terms of a little bit broader mandate to clear all the sidewalks in the right of way. Again, I appreciate it being
Not
on
mine.
Rockville Road, but why not have it done on the other public sidewalks? Plus, what Arthur's saying, which is help, Mr. Jones or Mr. Smith, who's 90, shovel the walk to their home. Because that's a safety issue, and safety is a government function.
Yeah.
For anybody elderly needs a safe access from their house.
Okay, so I would ask Ron to clarify, because it was my understanding that while Mr. Smith, 90, will request this possibly, Ms. Miller, next door, who's 35, does have a certain responsibility, and there's a liability issue as well, to clear her sidewalk. Ron?
Yeah, the village code, section 7204, closely tracks the county requirements. Both the county and the village require owners within 24 hours after a snowfall ceases to shovel snow and ice from the sidewalk. You don't have to do it while it's snowing, but within 24 hours after, you're supposed to shovel. And if you don't, you could be fined.
Yep.
With respect to liability, I mean that's really the homeowner's liability.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful.
Fine. The village, however, being the ones responsible for the right of way, do have a potential tort liability for slip and fall cases. However, case law generally provides that when someone voluntarily walks on sidewalk where there's snow or ice, they assume the risk of doing so. So it's generally hard to find a municipality liable for slip and fall or snow on the sidewalk that is obvious.
And this happens all the time. I mean, who are our people? Miss Smith and Miss Miller? Mr. Smith and Miss Miller. So we shovel Mr. Smith's walk, but say Miss Miller goes out of town and she's in, I'm not a skier, where's the Stowe? I don't know.
Yeah.
And they're not there. This happens all the time in the neighborhood. And then, they're not there for 72 hours, and then say Mr. Smith goes out and he falls on Miss Miller's shoveled walk.
Right.
So we could play it all day.
My only last point, and it just gets back to what Lori had mentioned earlier, and I also see Keith, who has been amazing with him and his boys, to go out and volunteer normally to help those folks. He's never asked for a dime, and he always does it, I remember being shocked, Arthur, when you first presented this last year and the cost of doing this. So that's just addressing Marty's. I think the cost would be so prohibitive to do it for everyone, and so narrowing it down, and then I just put this out there, maybe it's a pilot, and you might need to do a criteria Because if all of a sudden you get a lot, it
Yeah.
really does raise the cost.
Yeah, we'll see,
prohibitively.
we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the technology has changed over the last 10 years.
No. So in my
Well,
research,
Yeah, go ahead.
go.
I'm trying to remember exactly, and I hate to hazard a guess, but I recall years ago, the village did shovel
Yes.
sidewalks for any resident that wanted it, you know, mostly elderly. But it had become so expensive that
Yeah.
the village decided to discontinue it.
Yeah.
And then, as Niles said, just kept doing a Brookville because of the special circumstances there.
Right. In fact,
And
as I recall,
around that
Rod,
same time, it may have been 2010,
yeah,
the council tried to encourage people to shovel their own walks and raised the fine in the code to $100 because I think it was $25 for half a century.
We could raise the fine even higher and fund Chevy Chase at home.
Well, it's also like, you know, I don't mean to be too cute by half here, but there are also a lot of young adults or children that are trying to make a buck during these snowstorms, and so we might find out that the folks that would qualify for this or would request it would rather contribute to that effort as well.
right,
So
that's right.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrew. Niles may know. The village may have a list of teenagers that offer that service.
So-
I think that maybe that's the town of Chevy Chase. I think
Yeah,
the town of Chevy Chase.
does.
I think
A list
Gene
of students
Sperling
that-
has
But Gene-
circulated
yeah.
some of
Love to have a
this.
phone call.
But yeah,
Yeah.
no, Jean is sent out, I think, before, including on the list there, her list of
But
of
we don't
ones.
have an official list.
And we don't have an official list, but part of that is it, at least my view has been, you don't want to be prejudicing sending people to whoever they want. It should be the residents connecting with each other and
Yeah.
not sort of doing that.
Yeah.
Just as a point of reference, I asked
No,
Summers.
that's right. Niles gave the legal answer that I should have given.
Yes.
Although I said they maintain a list, the town or the village wouldn't be making any representations as to the quality of the work.
Right.
and not taking any responsibility for any liability that may result from the work.
Mhm.
And anyone would be able to offer their services, and they would pick anybody they want, of course.
Yeah.
So Andrew, I wasn't sure at this point, I know we've had really important dialogue on both these points, so I wasn't sure if we make a motion to vote to proceed. The only minor last point on the snow shoveling piece is, I believe it was the village or the town of Chevy Chase, and what they do is they have a criteria, like if it's over a certain, so I think just some tweaking around,
Right.
because you don't want like a dusting
Yeah.
and then it's going to be 50 degrees the next day. I think
So
Well,
I believe it's
dusting, and then there's another dusting, an hour and a half later, and
Right.
they have to come back.
Yeah.
I mean, that could also.
So the criteria is over. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just saying I don't want to get
Yeah.
into the minutiae of snow shoveling, which I really do not know much about, other than the time when I perhaps do it for us and a neighbor. But yeah.
So there's two things. So the criteria is over 2 inches. So if there's a snowfall that accumulates more than 2 inches, and I believe it's in the village of Chevy Chase, they do all of the sidewalks. Somerset also does all of the sidewalks for all of their streets. And I talked to Matt Trollinger about what they do, and the cost of doing all of their sidewalks was double the cost of snow plowing. So if snow plowing is about $30,000, doing all of the streets would be about $60,000 as a back of the envelope sense of it.
Right.
So
And
that's
in
just the
fact,
way of
to
seeing it.
refresh Ron's memory, the last time the village did all of it was $70,000 for the sidewalks.
Right.
Yeah.
Now some of that is dependent on how much
much
snow
snow.
you get,
Right.
which is another good point.
Well,
Right.
with climate
Yeah.
change, maybe. We
Okay,
will.
so
I know,
what
it
do we,
might be a moot point.
Silver lining.
Silver lining.
That's
No
right.
composting, but climate change has reduced the cost of snow
We'll hardly
shoveling.
have
Okay,
any
so
snow
we-
anymore anyway.
formally introduced the budget, and we have
Correct.
to formally
Yeah.
introduce an ordinance to
You have to
adopt
formally
the budget.
so there's 2 votes to introduce the ordinance to adopt the budget, and then
We haven't passed it yet.
yeah, it's just to
And it can be
introduce.
amended.
And then you also have to introduce the resolution to do the tax rates. Now, the tax rates aren't changing under this. So what's good about that is there's other requirements if we were changing them about notice and such, but if we're just doing it, we just have to introduce these.
Okay.
So it's 2 votes.
So someone want to move to introduce the budget?
I'll move to introduce it.
Okay. Second?
I should second my own budget.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And then
The
the
tax.
resolution to approve levying a tax on,
Yeah.
Yep.
do we have
I
anyone
will-
who'd like
I
to?
will introduce, I will, what do I do?
Move to introduce.
Move to introduce.
Do we have a
Okay.
second?
A second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And moving on.
Moving on. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you.
Stimulating discussion.
Yes,
Yeah.
always. Always. Okay. So now on to the manager's report.
Right. So a few different things to discuss. First is we are working on the walkability improvements. The traffic group is supposed to get me the draft report of all that they are doing fairly soon, and then I can share that around to the council for their feedback. In regard to getting the speed bump on Thornapple, we've run into the supply chain issues that have been happening, that have been plaguing, where they say the delivery of the temporary speed bump materials will be about 5 weeks. What I'm recommending instead, after talking to our contractor, AB Veers, is to do just an asphalt speed bump. It'll be cheaper by about just under $5,000, and it will be quicker because with the asphalt plants up, AB Veers estimates that they could do it in a couple of weeks. So with that, so that's the first thing, is I recommend that the council instruct me to proceed with an asphalt speed bump in the same location as the temporary one.
Go do it.
And then just sort of do it.
Do we have to say anything other than go do it?
I'd say move to instruct.
Move to instruct.
Okay.
Go do it.
Go do it.
Go do it. And I think in the same vein, okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
We'll continue on this.
So part of that, once I get the full report, that's going to include proposed changes to Summit, Thornapple, Summit and Thornapple, Shepherd and Cummings, and including additional speed bumps and other potential things there. So once we have that, we can show that, and that will all be done there. So there's that. We are proceeding with the American Rescue Plan funds about doing a joint thing for the recording. I had a follow-up conversation with our finance people. They've had some changes again in what they're doing, so I'm trying to do that. But some of our fellow municipalities are anxious to do that as well, and so we'll follow up before the April 30th reporting.
Is Ron
Yes.
there? Ron, are you still there?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I did not include American Rescue Plan in the budget, thinking that that was in a different tranche, a different pocket coming under different, a kind of
So
in a different way. Was that appropriate?
Yeah, I think so. And that's just a matter of preference because this is not operating revenue for the village.
Okay.
It's in the nature of a federal grant.
and we have
So I think that's perfectly appropriate, Arthur.
Okay.
And we have a line item in our software that has it as a federal grant, and so we can just
Good,
add that
okay.
as a line in your.
Good.
Yes.
But
Good.
Council
Yes.
has
remind everyone who's still remaining.
Yes.
And the amount of that is
489,000 this year and 489,000 in some next year.
Got it.
And so the idea is to plan out, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of this, but some of this is related to stormwater management. Is the main thing that we're still going to pursue analysis of Taylor Street. The county has proposed in their budget doing work on Thornapple, and I'd like to in fact, I was on a meeting right before this with the county, where they were talking about how they are really pushing these type of things. And this is a good reminder to everybody. If you have an issue, or you think it might be a county drain or something like that, there's a form online to report it. To report that you see a storm drain backup or anything like that. That is directly led to the county increasing their budget for projects that could improve our stormwater infrastructure.
that's going in the newsletter.
So that's going to go into the wrap up again. But it's one of those things to keep in mind that that projects like this, like adding inlet, what the county is proposing is adding inlets at every intersection on Thornapple, are the types of projects that the village should be encouraging the county to do, and part of that is us studying these type of things. So what we're doing on Taylor, and I think there might be an expansion of that kind of stuff that we might want to see, depending on feedback that we get. So that was sort of jumping ahead a little bit.
And the only quick comment, again,
Yes.
this is more rhetorical, just to mention, is so the capital projects that are listed for the 500,000,
Right.
is there any overlap, and would that somehow?
So right,
fray?
so
That's the only
so these are our funds. So the funds in the designated reserves of 500,000 in each does not include the American Rescue Plan
Yeah,
funds.
understood.
So we can, the latest ruling, as I talked about, I think last month or the month before, the latest ruling from the Treasury Department is that we can use the American Rescue Plan funds for any regular government service, basically.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's basically what it is now said under this revenue loss provision that we agreed to do last month. So, streets, stormwater, things like that, other improvements that are of a regular government function, we can use those funds for, which we can sort of talk about and do as we're going forward.
Super. Thank you.
The next sort of walkability thing, I put it under utilities, but WSSC is going to be upgrading the water main on Brookville Road. We had a meeting with WSSC, their contractor who are doing it, the other managers, and the state. One of the things I brought up with the state while in that meeting was the Brookville Road sidewalk. What I got from the state was send us a concept of how you want to change the sidewalks here, and we'll try to get what they call a district permit to let you to do it while WSSC is doing their work. So the other thing that I would recommend is that we authorize me to try to engage the traffic group who've been doing all this other stuff to try to present a concept to the state to do that permit.
Go do it.
There are two things, just to clarify what we're doing. There are two things. One would be fixing the sidewalk, and two would be trying to bring it up, in
Higher.
width and height and
Yeah.
such, in the areas right now where there's right-of-way to do so. There are some places where the state right-of-way and private property are right there, and all we have is where the sidewalk is. That might take some negotiation with homeowners and things like that to expand that. But I think the low-hanging fruit of doing this is trying to work with them to increase the width where we can as the first phase of trying to improve the Brookville Road sidewalk.
Go do it. In Arthur's words.
Right. All right. So we talked a little bit about this before. Montgomery County is doing a couple of different projects in there that relate to the village. One I said is the inlets on Thornapple. They're also talking about, and it's written in, this is literally all the information I have. In the county budget, it says, there's a project to replace the head wall and concrete channel on Turner Lane. That's it. It's one line. I'm not sure whether that is our part of Turner Lane or the part on the other side of the park, right? I suspect it's on the other side of the park because there is that little brook there.
Yeah.
I
And they've
suspect
been
it's replacing
there've
that.
been surveyors out
Yes.
there.
And there's an area there at that first intersection.
Yes.
Where it looks really like it's falling apart,
Yeah.
like some of the tunnel or whatever, the pipes.
And that's where the surveyors were.
Yes, and so I
Okay.
suspect
That's where we
that's
ran
the
into
Yeah,
each
that's
other.
right. Yeah.
So I suspect that's what they're doing. What I want to talk to the county about is understand the impact this replacement could have on our stuff, because that channel is where the stuff from Taylor Street goes.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
It goes
Oh,
down that
right.
way and through there. So part of our study, part of what they're doing,
A
we're trying to work this out.
little backup on Taylor, hasn't hurt anyone.
I can argue Turner Lane is coming into Taylor.
No,
Yeah.
Turner Lane's
in the
not
rain.
involved.
So the long and the short of it on that, I'm just going to try to get more information. It was literally one line in a budget with no maps or no nothing. So
Okay.
I'm going to try to figure that out.
Awesome.
And that concludes my
Good.
report for
I have
now.
a question for you now
Yes.
about waste management
Yes.
trucks. We've talked about this before.
Mhm.
I think you're going to talk to them about parking their spare truck in the La Ferme.
In La Ferme.
Because they haven't done it yet.
Okay.
And they keep popping up on Taylor and Chestnut
Mhm.
in the morning when the traffic's picking up and the
Yeah.
kids are walking to school, and it's a really bad
Yeah.
blind spot. It takes up a lot of.
I will
energy.
talk to them.
Has there been any?
Yeah, I have to reconnect the parties because what we're trying to do is have Waste Management talk to La Firme about utilizing the parking spot. Early in the mornings, usually there's no one there from La Firme.
Right.
But I think we don't want to get them in there. So what I'll do is I'll follow up with them tomorrow and see where we are at on that. I've also told them, they did a couple of days, park outside the village. But I think one of those things where they start to get back in, it's one of those things where they try to do what they're most comfortable with rather than always what we want them to do. And so I'll follow up and talk to them again about that.
Great. Thank you, Niles.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, we're heading towards our conclusion in record time, but I do hope there's some resident comments because
If
why
I
would
might just say record time for you.
we are introducing for next month resident comments limited to 30 seconds at the top and at the end. I'm surprised to see Marty's hand up, but please.
Or is that an old one?
Yeah.
No, that's a new one.
Yes, thank you. I thought this was an incredibly positive meeting, and again, Andrew, I want to really thank you and commend you for allowing residents to comment topic by topic as we go through, because that's so much more, not just productive, but also respectful. It comes across as really much more welcoming and participatory, and really a meeting format that makes a big difference in the tone of the meeting and a big difference in how I think residents feel welcomed, and so thank you for the format here tonight. I have one final question for the folks who are up for re-election, which is Arthur and Jeff and Susan. Would you be willing to tell the public tonight whether or not you're going to put your nominations in tomorrow?
Okay, that's your final question. I'm going to put you on mute and I'll let them answer. Thank you.
I will say for the record that I have been nominated and have accepted the nomination.
Jeff?
I will say for the record that I am still making a determination, and I have some meetings tomorrow at my day job in terms of my travel schedule and things, because first of all, it's been such a privilege to serve, and I do not want to commit. I don't want to be like Tom Brady and declare, and then, so let's just say that I'm thinking. But with that said, Marty, I hope, I'm going to turn this around and simply say, I don't know who's listening. I know we have a small number of people still, the diehards, but whoever's on the fence, whoever is thinking about this, I fully encourage everyone who really is on the fence or think, as Arthur said, just do it, right? Because regardless, if you win, if you don't, I mean, it is a privilege to be here. And I hope that anyone who's been thinking about it, hesitant, they say, oh, it's too much work. Just do it, because really it's a blessing to be in this position.
And I'll have to tell you, when I first ran, I didn't even know what a Martin's Edition was, and I've since learned.
What a Martin's Edition or Martin's Editions was?
I didn't know either one.
Martin's Editions.
And Susan?
She's with Jeff.
I am considering my options.
All right. And with that, I would ask for someone to move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
9:04.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone else.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to end the meeting for all.
Good. Thank you, everybody.
I love it.
Record
for me.
Maybe
That was great.
maybe
That
just
was
flip
great.
a coin. Yeah.
I think it's so much more productive when we're sitting here.
It is so
Oh, it's
much
nice.
more
And
productive.
can wave our hands at each other.
I know. I really enjoy it. I hope we can one day do this without masks.
Yeah.